Dobro utro, dobar dan i dobro veče, dragi slušatelji i jednog podruma u Beogradu, ovo je radni izveštaj.
Da, vrlo dobro ti kaže.
Hvala, hvala. Welcome to episode
Da,
350. That's our new intro. For those of you,
yeah.
I know there's I think two of you, aside from GSP, who could understand that out there. So if you know, you know. But I don't know. Maybe there's
We're in a basement in Belgrade and we're not apologizing.
yeah. What can I say? Vucic's shock troops are merciless. That's why we're in the basement. Okay,
Yeah.
we're usually upstairs and we have to go downstairs. It's very rough lately in Belgrade. But in all seriousness, I'm glad I got to go before it all went to hell.
Yeah, yeah.
That is one thing. But we do have a more important topic, which is
Yep.
yet again the death of our democracy. And I have to ask for a tally. How many times has our democracy died since 2017?
1,347.
That
Those are just facts. Look it up. Google's the thing.
oh, absolutely. And you know what?
It's resilient and vocal, just like a child.
Exactly.
Democracy.
What can I say? It's the West's secret sauce.
It really is.
You know, not in the way that I think they meant, but they were right. Whoever said that is correct.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend, and we were talking like, there's like conspiracy theories, which, like Greater Israel, which are true. Everybody acknowledges it now, right? But for years, it was a conspiracy theory. But there's some conspiracy theories where like there's a kernel of truth. It's there, but it's not enough. It's not enough, right? So, it's kind of like, Putin went to Syria in order to destroy Syria. Like, well, why didn't you just leave it? Like, why didn't you just like why do you invest all that money in all those men? Like, wouldn't it have been faster? Right? And I said, my friend asked me, why do people believe that? And I said, I think it's because of democracy brain. I really do. Because the people who come up with those ideas, they honestly believe that despite their small demographic, that their knowledge is so powerful, it can alter the course of history. And guys like Putin know that, and so they have to traverse around it. They have to have these elaborate schemes where they bring aid to a country and lose blood and treasure for 11 years. But it was always their intent. It's not about like this country has a certain amount of strength, but it can't project it too far here, more there. Like, no, it can't be that. That's just too simple. And I think that's what it comes down to, anyways. I'm going off on a tangent.
No. I think this is a worthwhile tangent because we'll do the minutia minute, in which case we'll establish the case before we get into the Trump-Putin meeting about why Ukraine is so successful that Putin had no choice but to actually call Steve Witkoff over to the Kremlin to request a meeting with Trump, because that is how much on the back foot Russia is. And I think today's summit proved that, and I think we need to get in some of the proof of that, given what's been happening on
Yeah.
the front lines. And I think you can detail that better than anyone I know.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Let me get the phone ready. Okay, um, so these map updates, they're from earlier today. Today is Friday, the 15th of August. And I have some stuff from Thursday as well. So we'll start in the north. I'm going to ignore Sumy because it's been kind of static. The Ukrainians have been successful in retaking a town that the Russians had taken, and the Russians have been successful in getting a bit more entrenched in another town just east of it. But Sumy, the relative size of the land that the Russians control, has been about the same for several months now. And the same thing goes for the Kursk region and the Volchansk area. So we're going to begin with Kupiansk. And as you can see, Kupiansk is now definitely threatened. There are two incursions in the northern part of Kupiansk. So I'm starting to see why the Russians went on the other side of the Oskal River. It's obviously to stop from the Ukrainians being able to resupply Kupiansk from the west. In fact, this whole war, you could look at it that way. When Russia went in with something like 150 to 170,000 troops, that was never going to be enough. And so the kind of incursions that they made deep inside Ukraine always left those areas where the Ukrainians were entrenched vulnerable. And the Ukrainians would go on the attack, towards Donetsk and whatever those 3.5 years ago, and it couldn't be maintained. And Kupiansk is sort of similar. You have to sort of loop around from behind to stop all the uh, mm, all the resupplying of the troops coming from the west of Ukraine and so forth and so on. So anyways, so Kupiansk, as you can see, there is an incursion from the north, two of them. And of course, if you go to the next slide, the blow up will show it more clearly. Today, there was a 37 square mile breach that the Russians made east of Kupiansk towards Petropavlovka. And this is an area that the Russians, ever since they lost this area in September 2022, they haven't been able to, but not for lack of trying, to move this much. And it could be that Ukraine is running out of men, and that the West is running out of arms. So you see this area around Kupiansk tightening. It's important to remember that this is part of the Kursk region. So this is not Lugansk. That's why it has this orange color. Go to the next slide. You'll see what I mean. So that dark sort of burgundy red, that's the oblast of Lugansk. The orange is Kursk. The red outline that you see there is the Oskal River, and this is what the Russians want.
Wait, do you mean Kharkiv, not Kursk?
Yes, Kharkiv, I'm so sorry.
No,
Yes,
it's no
yes.
problem.
Yeah. So this was a kind of a massive game, but what has stolen the spotlight this week has been, of course, and we'll get to it, what has been going on in the Pokrovsk front, rather the area north and east of Pokrovsk. The next slide is some gains that were taken in the Lugansk area and the northern Donetsk area. The gains here are that I'm going to focus on are in Zarchine. So this is as you can see in this slide, we have the forest belt. The Russians boxed in a lot of Ukrainian troops, probably not as much as there used to be, and that's why they've been successful, because those troops are being moved to the Pokrovsk front. Everybody is talking, of course, about the Azov 12th Brigade being dispatched to the Pokrovsk area. People are saying there's at least another one or two more brigades on top of that. So we're looking probably around 10,000 men, maybe a little less, because the brigades nowadays are not as big as they used to be. And but a little bit of forces are constantly being moved from other areas of the front into Pokrovsk. So let's go to the next slide, which is a blow up of Zarchina. You can see that the Russians have crossed, I think this is the Zherobets River. Um, these water wells I'm guessing, are man-made. They're probably for industry. One of the sort of features of Eastern Ukraine is almost every town has like some kind of industry, has an apartment complex and an industrial complex as well, and have also these water reservoirs.
I can tell you from
Nonetheless,
firsthand experience, if it was not for the Cyrillic, you would not be able to distinguish it from the Rust Belt in the United States.
interesting.
I mean,
Yeah,
I exaggerate, but like in terms of like the town setup, like obviously the buildings are going to be different. Like there's going to be the local
yeah,
differences, but if you look structurally, like there's small industrial towns, and having been in the Rust Belt my entire life, all of this actually seems more familiar than one would expect.
yeah. And I've driven through those areas where you're from, and also like through the Alleghenies and Pennsylvania and Illinois and all that. But so you can see that the Russians are moving steadily almost everywhere along the front. That's Zerchina. Now, south of this area is, of course, Seversk. And as you can see in the white outlines, that the Russians have been making steady ground here. This has been another area that has been extremely tough. And we'll get to blow-ups of the forest belt that the Russians captured several days ago that will kind of explain why they've had probably a bit more success here than they otherwise have had. If you go to the next slide of Seversk, it's a blow up. You can see now how close they are to the outskirts, and yeah, sorry, yes, yeah. So sorry, somebody was trying to call me, and I just ended the call. Forgive me. So yeah, so the incursions in Seversk, you can see now. Now Seversk is on a hill, and it is extremely well defended. And what it has going for it is the long tract of land between on its eastern flank is on a low ground, but also there are no towns, and so it's very hard for the Russians to resupply without getting hit. And if you go to the next slide, did you already do the blow up? I'm
Uh,
just wondering.
yeah, I have the first Seversk slide, and I'll go ahead into the second one.
Yeah. So the second one, you're going to have a better idea of how close they are to the city. They've been moving along the water reservoirs, also along train tracks. But generally, it's been a hard fight to get even those entrenchments that the Ukrainians had built shortly after they retook this area. Well, I don't know if the Russians ever controlled Seversk. I don't think so. But they're sort of back where they were, let's say, in 2022. The next slide will show you why it's a little bit easier to encroach on Seversk, which is a kind of a blow up, and it'll tie in Seversk with what has been going on in Zerchine and Liman. So those arrows that you see, that whole area is the forest belt. And if you notice, there's a area of like a blue square surrounded by the red. That's where the Russians went in several days ago. And this has allowed them to put pressure on the Ukrainians so that they can't defend Seversk as well as they normally could. The next slide will show you just how entrenched this area is. This is an area that the Russians controlled for quite some time, but they lost it, I think, late last year or the beginning of 2025, somewhere thereabouts. It's been well over 6 months or 8 months. So they've got this force of the Ukrainians blocked. Again, this area has now expanded compared to what it was. And if you go to the next slide, again, it'll contextualize more what I'm talking about. Um, so that is, let's say, the northern Donetsk front, and continuing, we are at Chasiv Yar. Of course, the Russians captured Chasiv Yar. Now they're expanding their control. In this slide, I've circled where Chasiv Yar is, and then I've created a crescent at the bottom of the screen indicating where Konstantinovka is, but there is a urban agglomeration that just goes on a diagonal from there, on a northwest diagonal, and that will lead up to basically the fortress cities of Donetsk, which are Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. So the first of these towns, of course, is Konstantinovka. Um, Now, Konstantinovka is in a low ground, but the other big development that has happened, of course, is an area in between. Konstantinovka and Pokrovsk. Of course, it's much closer to Pokrovsk, right? But nonetheless, as you take a look, there's this huge salient that formed a couple of days ago, which is now expanding. This slide is from yesterday, so it's at least 24 hours old. I'm hearing stories that the salient now is getting thicker, particularly on the right side, the eastern side. And there's also stories about like the Azov 12th Brigade going in there to try to stem the expansion. Now, of course, the Russians are going to make a certain amount of gain, and then they have to stop in order to consolidate those gains. If they go too quickly, right, it'll be an area that they'll never be able to control in the future. So it's better to go in smaller amounts and consolidate those gains and then push again. The next slide will show you where things are relative to each other. So you will be able to see in this slide where that salient is in relation to Pokrovsk, which I've circled at the bottom. You can see now Pokrovsk is surrounded on three sides. There are incursions already into Pokrovsk now. The Russians don't control the high rises yet, but there is a significant number of areas, residential areas in the southwestern part of the city that they do control. Of course, the Ukrainians had this like deep state map that was the most incredible claim. So the way the Russians breached into Pokrovsk was they took 150 men in camouflage, and all these men would move very slowly towards Pokrovsk. Sometimes only 25 meters a day. You can well imagine they've got those furry, grassy suits. 150 of these guys, and the Ukrainians boldly killed 120, but 30 managed to get through and go right into Pokrovsk and take over like a section of Pokrovsk. Now, I do think there is a hint of truth, and that's more about moving slowly and sparsely so that it negates both artillery, and to a lesser extent, it negates the power of drones, right? If a drone has to, I mean, yes, you can argue that there's a drone for every soldier on the field, but sometimes they miss, and they would like to hit a group instead of just one guy, right? Because once the drone is used, it can't be used again. And so, unless it's one of those that the drop armaments. Um, so anyhow, you're supposed to believe this. I thought it was so ridiculous when I heard it. But in any case, I do think there is a kernel of truth there. Something like that probably was done, although I don't think it's like 150 guys, moving 25 kilometers a day, like in slow
No,
motion.
no, it's
The Yukis won't notice.
that reeks of 2022 cope about why Russia was advancing. That's
Yes.
that's what it feels like, and that's what a lot of the takes from the overtly pro-Ukraine side feel like right now. You go to pretty much all the regular commentators you'd expect from that end, and it's Russia's winning by feigning the illusion of winning, by feigning the illusion of success in the battlefield, by moving troops forward. That's it's always the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
thing with that.
Yes.
The ISW loves doing that. Putin is faking victory by actually winning. It's we need to read
Oh
some
yeah, yeah.
ISW stuff
He
soon because
was
they've
he
been
was begging he was begging Trump. He was begging Trump. Yeah.
he was begging Trump, and Trump just would not yield. He steamrolled him, and I flipped the channel to CNN, and they said that Putin owns America. So I'm not. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, yeah. No, both are true. So in this in this next map, I've circled both Pokrovsk and I think it's Mirnograd. Yeah, Mirnograd. I mean, these are twin cities. They're right beside each other. They're not really broken. They're connected now. As far as I understand, I think they're like the combined population was between 50 to 60,000 people. Imagine it's much less now. I heard one figure around that it was between 5 to 7,000 people at the most. So most of the people have left, and so you can see now just how dire the situation is for Ukraine, because this salient, what it eventually will do, the pressure that it's putting on the Ukrainians is they're going to now have to devote areas where they've already, like for instance, they already lost the town of Toretsk, and Toretsk is just south of Chastov Yar, which is also Konstantinovka is just north of Toretsk. So it's just a little bit on the east side of that salient that we were looking at. Um, that's creating a division of labor. And meanwhile, the Russians are sort of moving in both directions. At the southern part of the salient, of course, they're moving westward and they're moving northward. So they're, you know, they it's still going to take some time before they start to surround Konstantinovka, but at the moment, Konstantinovka is is being threatened, and it's not where the Russian forces are giving the most amount of effort. However, there are roads that this tall salient that we were looking at is also threatening roads that supply Pokrovsk. But and I think everybody understands that Pokrovsk was for years the hub from where Ukrainian forces would find both shelter, armaments, and so on, much like Bakhmut. And Chasiv Yar, for that matter, also acted as a hub after Bakhmut fell. So that is the Pokrovsk front, and also about 2 or 3 days ago, the Russians took another town along the Dnieper in Zaporozhye, Kamyanske. However, the Ukrainians have successfully counterattacked and taken some pretty big swaths. Now, the Russians still hold on to Kamyanske, but Kamyanske is now threatened from the north.
But before you
From
continue, I do have to
Yes,
backtrack on Pokrovsk a little. I have a very important question about the defense infrastructure. Do you remember? I think it was about a year ago, maybe 10 months ago, sometime last fall, where the reports were instead of building defenses, that city employees were planting flowers. I need to know
yes.
if those flowers deterred the Russians.
It's one of those moments, right?
It is one of those moments, but in all seriousness, Pokrovsk has been a slog. It's been a very slow moving campaign, understandably so, because it, we're clearly making progress in the direction that the Russians want to go. But it took
Yes.
uh, months, if not over a year, of protracted preliminary battles to actually get to this point. Because, and you're going to start seeing the cope right now, and I don't want to focus just on the cope of the quote unquote other side of this, but that Pokrovsk is strategically insignificant, that it means nothing. But we're talking about,
No, it's
once again,
significant.
since
Yeah.
2014, one of the major logistics hubs and one of the last cities in the so called Fortress Belt that was built after the Minsk agreements. And you go back, you listen to particularly Merkel and Hollande, who said this. The Minsk agreements were just buying time for a larger war, which I think everyone
Yeah.
implicitly knew, but to come out and actually say it is crossing another line altogether. But point being is, this at this point, I'm gonna come out and say, is currently and will be more pivotal than Bakhmut, than Avdiivka, which were the other two big ones so far. And that when
Yes,
Pokrovsk
absolutely.
falls, we're probably going to see progress in pretty quick order. As to what that actually materializes into, I think that remains to be seen. Whether the Russians will go for the so-called drive to the Dnieper, which is what conventional wisdom, that's what the pretty much everyone says they'll do, understandably so. Whether they'll focus on Kharkiv or somewhere in the north to consolidate gains up there, perhaps try to make a push for more official integration of territory. Like I said, we'll start to really see what Russia's post-plan war plans are after the fall of Pokrovsk. I think so, and depending on the direction they go, we can probably estimate what kind of deal beyond just the often stated terms of the four oblasts plus Crimea, and no NATO, demilitarization, etc., we'll start to see, in my opinion, a clear picture of what Russia's post-war vision of the region looks like.
Yeah. And so the last slide is just some blue arrows, courtesy of Weeb Union, describing the momentum that the Ukrainians have to stop these incursions north of Kamyansk, um, because they've already were threatening Stepanogirsk, which is a town north of Kamyansk. And you can see what they're doing. They're trying to cut off the Russians along the river on one side, and from the east to drive into deeply into Kamyansk. Now, as I said, the slide is from 2 days ago. I haven't heard any new news, so that's all I know for now. Um, I mean, of course, Russia wants to take this, I think, but it's not the number one priority right now is Pokrovsk, and then that last belt of fortress cities, Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, and Slavyansk. And that's it for the minutia minute.
Well, it's good to properly have it back once again. Like I said, I can think of no better person to lay out the case for why Ukraine is winning. You see, under the new regime, with where we post our shows, we do need to take into consideration there is an official narrative that we do have to toe. You'll find the truth if you dig for it. But if anyone asks, if you want the sound bites, Ukraine is winning. Slava Ukraina. What are the other ones now? I don't even remember. I need to go back to 2022 and dig up all the pro-Ukraine copes and just have those just constantly flashing on screen in order to just protect our image and to be on the quote-unquote right side of history. But I'm getting too far into the weeds on all of this. And I think it's not a unique take when I say the situation is catastrophic. What many of the, say, doomsayers on either side would have said early on in the war that this war is going to be over in short order, I think this looks like what people are expecting it to look like. And if you do
Yeah.
zoom, and I do have to answer the criticism, yes, if you do zoom in on the map, these are very unimpressive gains visually. But
Hmm.
I was thinking about this throughout the course of the week, watching the course of the front lines. I think a lot of, I guess what you could say, casual observers of this war on either side, I think what they failed to understand is the actual objective of this war. Because if you're just somebody who is plugged in, normal center, left, center, right media, you think that Putin's goal is to just annex all of Ukraine, if not all of the former Soviet Union. And by that metric, that is a catastrophic failure, the fact that Russia has not even broken out of the Donbass yet. If that's what you genuinely think this war about, which it's not, but if you understand what this war is actually about, the reason why the Russians intervened in Ukraine, this looks dire for the Ukrainians. And it's a very easy narrative to spin to the low information voter, to borrow the term, or the average person who might be somewhat politically aware, but not to the extent where they're going to sit here for 2.5 hours every week and talk about these subjects. And with all that being said, at this point, I know it's been thrown around. I know that even Budanov himself said it, that the Ukrainian army's ability to function in an operational sense, that is, in terms of being able to have commands from Kiev to the front line, is rapidly deteriorating. And I think we'll see a point. Go on.
I was just going to say the statement that he made in the winter this year, which was he forecasted about 6 months ago that he expected by August for things to get extremely difficult for Ukrainian troops. So I think, remember we said, I think back in May or maybe June, but I think it was May. I said we'll just have to wait and listen. We'll just have to wait and see if Budanov's forecast is correct. Because sometimes Ukrainians say certain things, they make the situation sound more dire than it is because in 2 or 3 months they may get to that, and so it's a way to plead for more armaments, more equipment, or whatever kind of help that they need.
Yes, and especially when we're talking about intelligence chief, they are the type that are always going to twist the situation to fit a narrative. And I think Budanov has excelled at that. I will say, regardless of what you think of him, he's a competent man in his own right. A lot of the unconventional attacks against Russia have been his doing, have come from his desk. And so yeah, he's somebody who's going to know what he's talking about. But it looks like he didn't sugarcoat it. He gave a plain report of what
Yeah.
the situation actually was, which probably implies more desperation back in the winter when he did make these statements. And I do think
Right.
as we move into the fall, the operational capability of the Ukrainian military is going to rapidly deteriorate to the point where it's not going to be a complete breakdown, but especially depending on the political situation in Kiev, where you're going to get a fracturing of the Ukrainian army, where local commanders are going to start effectively fighting the war themselves because they're either not receiving any orders from Central Command or any worthwhile orders from Central Command.
Hmm.
The West, even the quote unquote coalition of the willing countries, seem less and less engaged, which probably means less intelligence, less military support. I know that the big debate right now, especially in the light of the Trump Putin meeting, is are they going to try to force through another aid bill through Congress? Are they going to launder support for the war through the Europeans? And while I do, yes, think that they are not going to just abandon Ukraine outright, they have too much at stake there, there is a growing disinterest where you are, in my opinion, seeing from many relevant parties in this war a gradual withdrawing of support because they realize the direction that this war is taking and that they'll have enough there to save face, they'll have enough there to bog down the Russians, rack up a few more Russian casualties because that's ultimately the way they think. But at the end of the day, it's a slow acceptance of what should have been evident by, in my opinion, 2023, that Ukraine was not going to walk away from this war with anything resembling a victory, and that the longer they put off negotiations, the more severe it is going to be.
Yeah. I think when they lost Bakhmut and the summer offensive failed, and the Russians had taken Avdiivka, by the end of 2023, like you had to know that Ukraine wasn't even capable of another offensive yet over again. But you brought up Budanov and Budanov's forecast. That aligned with the time where they were basically pushed out of Kursk. And I don't know if he was I don't think he's one of the architects of Kursk.
No, it's not his kind of operation. He's more, once again,
And
stuff like Operation Spiderweb is more what
yeah,
Budanov does.
right. But it's what I think he probably told them to do. I think it was Siersky's idea to go into Kursk. But there was an article, I think back in June or July, by Le Monde. If I'm wrong about Le Monde, then it was a different French newspaper, but I want to say it's Le Monde. And so a French reporter went into the Kursk region because basically the bodies of elderly people and children are showing up. So the Ukrainians were just executing like civilians, like old people and children,
Well,
including this one guy that they were intimidating on screen, a guy that was in Donetsk and left Donetsk, and then he got caught in Kursk.
I will reiterate.
Like a guy that was honestly looked like an old hobo, but they get their kicks from that, right? So the uh, the Ukrainians were very upset by this article and called it counterproductive. Yeah, it's counterproductive because it shows what assholes you guys have always been.
Well, I will
They
reiterate a story. The first story I remember, the day of the Kursk offensive, the beginning of it, which I believe was August 6, 2024. Just a normal day. I'm sitting at work going through Telegram as one does when work is slow. And like I said, within probably 12 hours of the offensive starting, what I see, as far as I know, these might be the first confirmed casualties of Kursk. Family of four killed. The mother and father were early 20s, two children. Think the mother was pregnant. Don't quote me on that.
Yes.
But that was, like I said, within 12 hours of the Ukrainians attacking Kursk and entering Suja.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not surprising that they found bodies all over that region. Anyways, but so in some strange way, I don't know if you want to get into it right now, but Budanov, the spider web operation, all of that stuff, in a way, dovetails into the so-called summit in Alaska,
I do just want to make one
because
more point about the Kursk massacres, however. Transport the scenario back to 90s Bosnia, the UN would call it a genocide.
oh, of course, yeah,
And frankly, if you look at what happened, the casualties may have exceeded that on some parts of the front. I mean, if you take all of it in totality, the AFU's wanton disregard for civilian life, and of course the obvious, but both sides statement that yes, the Russians have racked up civilian casualties of their own, but it's simply not a
yeah, not like
comparison.
this,
It is simply not a
yeah,
comparison. And I don't
yes,
care if you're pro Russia, pro Ukraine. Looking objectively at it, especially since 2014, it is not a comparison.
yeah.
But do go on
Yeah,
with the
I
point you
think it
were on.
kind of dovetails because, I don't know about you, but when I first heard about the summit, like some of the things I thought about was, are the Ukrainians going to do something to sabotage the talks? Not that I have any great hope in the talks, because what is there that Trump is going to offer Putin?
A car ride.
Uh, a car ride, yes, in the beast, the beast. So one of the things I thought was, do they have another kind of operation? Of course, it won't be the same kind of operation, because that kind of an operation can't be repeated. Not because of the Russians have now began constructing shelters to protect those planes, but because they're more situationally aware of something like this happening again, and have cracked down, particularly of the immigrant communities that were used in this within Russia. But I just thought, there's a summit coming up. Is there going to be another kind of attack? Maybe this time it will target civilians again, but not really. I mean, the Russians and the Ukrainians exchanged drone attacks. The Russians attacked Sumy, the Ukrainians attacked Belgorod, killing civilians there. I don't know if civilians were killed in Sumy or not, but the Russians have been, this past week, targeting a lot of centers of concentration centers for military. And in fact, there was an admonition that one of them killed something like 12 Western mercenaries. Um, Not the huge numbers that we saw, and of course there was that horrible tragedy with the Russians getting hit by HIMARS strikes, where something like between 80 to 100 guys got killed. I mean, that was embarrassing. And but in smaller numbers, I've been seeing more of these attacks. So anyways, I thought, like, maybe something like that might happen again, and but so far it hasn't. And I guess that could be the segue to talking about the Alaska summit.
Yes, and I'll talk about some of the lead up to it, which I did briefly mention, albeit in a bit of a joking way, towards the beginning of the show. And this summit did come after what really felt like a freezing over of already icy relations between the United States and Russia, but particularly between Trump and Putin as individuals. Because
Yeah.
Truth Social, which I guess is the new White House press release, Trump was making
Yeah.
statement after statement about I'm
All
so
caps.
all caps. Thank you for your attention. About how disappointed he is in Putin, how Putin needs to stop the killing, how he's had so many chances for peace and we've been so generous, and that I talked to Zelensky. It was a great conversation. It's like that shouting match in the Oval Office never even happened. That was like 6 months ago. That was forever ago. We are only 7 months into Trump's second term. I will remind you all that it's been this much of a ride so far, and that who knows what we're in store for going down the road. But to get back on track, It seemed like a very conciliatory attitude towards the Ukrainians, especially after he was rubbing elbows with EU leaders, with his greatest trade deal ever with Ursula, talking to Macron and Starmer, and all of them were buttering him up. I don't know what it is, but it does seem like the liberal elite, at least on the other side of the Atlantic, have learned the valuable lesson. If you stroke Trump's ego, you can get him to do just about anything you want. Which I suppose is probably a lesson for the domestic liberals, where if they would just engage in a bit of flattery that wouldn't destroy their credibility with their own base, they could probably get Trump to pass amnesty, frankly. But once again, I'm getting sidetracked here. But after what seemed like a very Atlanticist position coming from the White House, what seemed like a breakdown in negotiations, you all of a sudden have Witkoff in Moscow. Now, the claim from the American side is that Putin met with him, and then Putin was the one who requested the meeting. And of course, this came after the our arbitrary, ever-shifting deadline. If Putin doesn't accept Trump's demands now, there's going to be so many sanctions. There are going to be the secondary sanctions. Well, somebody did the math on that and realized that if you have 500% tariffs in half the world, you just can't have a functional global economy. And the United States, being the center of that global economy, will suffer immensely, and that will reflect bad on you personally, Donald. They came to that conclusion, and they arranged the summit. Now, this summit, I figured they're going to announce it. They're going to do it 6 months to two. I'm not 6 months. 6 weeks to 2 months down the road, as they usually do with these kind of things. It's all the preliminary meetings, and that would be in some third-party country, probably somewhere in the Middle East. Maybe Kazakhstan if they're feeling very serious about the situation, or Singapore. I know that's another one. That's where Trump and Kim met during their first meeting. But you figured it'd be some neutral third-party country. Qatar and the Emirates have been hosting a lot of talks lately, particularly when it comes to the issue with Israel and Syria to a lesser extent. But the invitation was extended to have Putin come directly to Alaska. And many speculate that's because they didn't want our favorite green t-shirt wearer to show up and crash the meeting by attending some other summit in Dubai or Istanbul or wherever, if the two were to meet in one of those countries. But they just did it directly on U.S. territory, the closest U.S. territory to Russia, a place with certain cultural and even religious significance to Russia, given their history of expansion across Siberia into North America. And they both showed up. They both dithered for quite a bit, because I think the summit, the official handshake was supposed to happen at 11:30 Alaska time, 3:30 Eastern time, and it was probably about 10 till 4 Eastern when they actually got out of the plane. A very warm embrace. Putin looked very energetic. Trump did his normal, just kind of slow walk out. Oh, here's a wonderful imagery of Trump emerging from the plane. So let me go ahead and just get that up right here, because I think this will give everything you know. In fact, this picture you sent me, and you guys will see it in a second, looks like Trump's at a rally. This is like what he does, like when he's walking on or off stage.
Yeah.
let me get this up. Yeah, he's out there on the tarmac. His delegation is in the back, his security detail, and yeah, he's just like doing like the clapping. He's all energetic. And I don't have the picture of the video of it, but Putin's like sprinting down. Oh, here it is. Here's them actually meeting. The famous handshake. But yeah, Putin was like, I wouldn't say sprinting, but he was like bouncing down the stairs to get to.
If Putin was a woman, he'd be pregnant. You know, I've never seen a guy beam so much.
Yeah,
just look at this. Look at him. He was like this the whole time. This is him inside the beast. Like, just.
Okay, yeah. Let me just get the rest of these up. Let me just put it this way. This is what I'd expect from Trump and Macron.
Yeah. Notice also in one of the photos how Trump pulls him in.
Yeah, I'll get to that one.
Right. Right, but one of my absolute favorites was from that conference where Putin was asked, "Will will you stop killing civilians and beating up your wife?
Oh yeah, of course.
All very honest questions, which I did this screen cap because it's just so ridiculous. I love it that he was having a great time. He was like he was just laughing at these reporters, like
This
as
was
if he takes them.
this was a vacation for him.
Yeah. And like, of course, I love this meme. You know.
Okay, here's him in the Beast, and then I'll go ahead and get the pictures of him. Let's just say, taking a leaf out of Trump's book and just harassing the press, as one
Yes.
as one
Good point.
should. Like I said, this was a Disneyland trip for Putin. That's all this was. Which you know what? I think that is a great start to productive dialogue, and I'll get into some of the more, I guess you could say, serious points of this. But here was the picture of him just having some fun with the media, and I think what we have right here is probably the most important image to come out of this summit. Let me just get this one right here. uh, here it is. If I didn't have show art, this would be the thumbnail. It's wonderful, but it was a very warm embrace. What shocked everyone is that, as I'll return to the picture, Putin got in the Beast. He got into Trump's presidential limo, which, according to everyone, was not planned. That Putin had his own presidential limo flown over, and that they were going to drive to the summit point, which was the military base in Anchorage, separately. But they got in the same car after a very warm embrace, and this seemed all like I said. This is what you'd expect from Trump and Macron. I don't know what it is about those two, but even like back during his first term, remember when they planted the tree on the White House lawn?
Yes.
That's what this felt like, and you know, not that I have much confidence in Trump in general anymore, but this is what they took from us. Okay, we should have had this back in 2017. This is the future we were robbed of. But to get into the more serious points of the summit, the meeting lasted for, I think, just over 2, almost 3 hours. And it was a 3-on-3 talk where Trump was accompanied by Rubio and Witkoff. Kellogg noticeably absent. And then Putin, on his end, had Lavrov and Ushakov with him. I believe Kirill Dmitriev was also there, as well as U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, which I imagine there were all kinds of, as these summits usually go, smaller talks between lesser officials going on at the same time. And there wasn't really anything concrete out of this. I didn't expect anything concrete to come out of this. But the press conference was, I don't use this term lightly, bizarre. Where there was no questions taken, which I honestly respect in a way. But
because they were going to risk 2018 the Helsinki summit all over again.
Hey, did Putin tell you the Russians colluded in the election? No. What about your intelligence agencies?
They're so the most leading and dishonest questions. It's asked in bad faith. It's just so.
Yeah. For example, as you brought up earlier, hey Putin, when did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But what I did appreciate is that Putin came out almost immediately with just like a minor history lesson. I don't think he can help himself sometimes talking about the historical significance of Alaska as a meeting point between both of them, and so it was productive.
The pilots during World War II and the monuments.
Yes. And then Trump came out and gave his just piece and said, "Oh, we're going to talk to the Europeans and the Ukrainians, and we'll work with something from there." And then they shook hands and they parted ways. And I will mention one other thing Putin did, because he did visit the World War II memorial with both the American and the Soviet pilots. He also met and exchanged gifts with the Bishop of Alaska in the Orthodox Church,
Yeah.
which did also seem like just a very cordial meeting. I believe they exchanged icons, and to my understanding, that time frame was after he left the. I'm trying to. I don't remember where it was in the time frame. I think it was at some point before the summit actually officially started. It wasn't clear, but with that, like I said, even though the way the meeting was cut short because they canceled the lunch schedule for the next day, all of the objective signs indicates that there was a falling out and that
Yeah.
this was a failure, similar to say Trump and Kim meeting in Vietnam in 2019, where Trump just walked. But the press conference was, like I said, extremely cordial. They said that they have a framework. They're going to take it. They're going to iron it out. We didn't sign anything today, and we're going to check back. And of course, even before the summit happened, Trump said that, I would like to go to Russia one day, and that Putin has invited me. How true that actually is, I'm not sure. But like I said, the way it was so abruptly cut seemed to be a bad sign, but everything else points to a very friendly meeting between the two sides. And I will say, I don't expect much, if any, progress to really come out of this. Perhaps a best case scenario, you could get a normalization of U.S. Russian relations with talks on arms control and other broader issues. But in terms of Ukraine, what's going to happen is, as Trump said, we're going to take it back to the Europeans and the Ukrainians. They're going to say no. Zelensky's going to start kvetching about something. And then it's going to be back in business as usual. Trump talks the tough game while trying to look for an escape hatch because this is fundamentally a lost conflict. He'll exchange words with Putin. He'll say he's disappointed, even though they were such good friends. That Putin's such a nice guy, but he's also just so stubborn. You can't work with him. And just in my opinion, probably just going to be a back and forth where there's not really going to be that major of an escalation, but nothing's really going to change, and that the situation is just going to gradually continue to deteriorate on the Ukrainian front lines. And like I said, best case scenario, maybe we get some sort of smoothing over of relations, at least on the surface, whether that's the restoration of some economic ties, the lifting of some sanctions, or progress towards arms control, which I think is probably the most important one you could do with the way a lot of the treaties are starting to break down, have been breaking down over the past several years. But really, like I said, I don't think anyone who was paying attention went into the summit with very high expectations at all. Like I said, you do have some very nice things that came out of it. I'll show a picture of them sitting together at the table again, with Putin harassing the journalists. But beyond a few photo ops, not much really happened.
Yeah, and I didn't have much expectations because there was nothing articulated before this. What I felt was kind of like a rushed meeting. Nobody's positions have changed. There was no articulation from either side that I mean, it's just like, well, we're willing to talk. I mean, these talks aren't really going to go anywhere. Um, of course, there is the theory that Trump knows that Zelensky, um, the neocons in America, the liberal elites in Europe want this war to go on, and if Trump has to sell armaments to the Europeans, will then give it to the Ukrainians. That's what'll happen. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say. I almost wonder, why did this even happen? What was the point of it? I know there were some people who were speculating it's a trap. Uh, Putin is walking into a trap. He he's being gullible. Of course, I never fault those people, because in many respects I'm one of those people too, because I think he has made many blunders. He's made several blunders in his career with respect to Ukraine, and also to even Syria. And so I think, is he capable of making some very good and shrewd decisions, and then he makes a decision that undoes all of that? Yeah, he's done that a few times with respect to Ukraine. Like if he had gone in with a larger force, you know, because there was this speculation that 120,000 men, the Europeans, the Americans knew that, if they didn't go in to try to prevent the Russians from from invading, that nothing would happen because that's an insufficient force, right? Remember that the Americans went in with something like 400 to 450,000. That's not including 50,000 British troops into Iraq, a country with half the population and half the geography, right?
Yes.
So they knew there's nothing. What is he going to achieve? Like, in that sense, I think he felt he understood what was going to happen, or at least he thought he did, and he thought maybe he could boo them and scare them into resolving this thing. What if, let's say, we're speculating here, what if instead of like the 150 to 170,000 that he did go in eventually, because it was something like 120,000 in November of 2021, what if he did go with the bigger force? I still don't think they would have done anything. Um, but maybe they would have. Maybe he was afraid of the escalation. I don't know his reasoning, but there was no reason why. Maybe he could have devoted more. Now he of course had to have a partial mobilization, and I think that is where the mistrust was. That's why he went with a smaller force. So all that talk about the Westerners who claim Putin said he would take over Kiev in 3 days, that's false because neither Putin nor they actually believed that would happen.
Straight out of Mark Milley's mouth.
Yeah, Mark Milley said it, but nobody else did. And because it's not a significant force. Uh, Ukraine's force was 2.5 to 3 times the size of Russia's, with just as advanced, if not more advanced, information technology, satellites, what have you, uh, North Star, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyways, so I don't think there was nothing that Trump could have offered him, and I think Trump knows he can't offer him. So the only move Trump has is basically to dislodge himself from this war. Because in the lead up to the summit, all he kept talking about, I mean, he would often pepper his statements with, this is not my war, it's Biden's war, right? Like, I gave lethal aid to Ukraine, I helped them increase their size uh, 3 times what it was during Obama's years, but I have nothing to do with this. I expanded the amount of CIA bases, but I have nothing to do with this, right?
Yes,
Um,
Obama sent blankets, Trump sent missiles, blah, 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 blah.
yeah,
That's.
yeah, and so I mean, I didn't think Trump was really serious about this stupid Nobel Prize, but he seriously wants it, and I wonder if it's just to spite Obama. Like, I wonder if he's just so petty. Like, everybody
I believe it.
knows Obama didn't deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. The whole Nobel Prize thing is a joke, anyways. But like a boomer, he holds on to that very tightly.
Yeah, it's a piece. It's the legacy he wants. He wants the trifecta. He wants to be able to have all these things on his tombstone. That's really all it comes down to. And I think that has led him to make some very rash and stupid decisions. I'll talk about the Armenia-Azerbaijan thing later because I think that's another thing he'll get a Nobel Prize from, or his claims that he
Yeah.
single-handedly ended the India-Pakistan war, or or his two biggest conflicting interests, where he wants some sort of peace in Gaza, but that also would mean sabotaging Israeli interests in order to achieve that. So that's also no go. And then remember Thailand and Cambodia, how they were fighting a war? He claimed to have stopped that in
Yeah.
15 hours. or whatever the stupid claim
Yeah.
was. That I don't know if that conflict is still ongoing, but I imagine it probably is in some sort a very latent way. But I mean, those kind of border disputes happen frequently, and as let's just say global security continues to deteriorate, they happen more frequently. But that doesn't mean we're going to get, say, 5 years of trench warfare between the Thais and the Cambodians. It's just not going to happen that way. But I do agree with you that Trump wants that legacy. He wants to be able to walk with the Nobel Prize. He wants to be the man who brought peace to Ukraine, and that even though it wasn't his war, it's Biden's war. But that narrative has never sat right with me, and I think anyone who once again has paid attention to the situation would know that. Well, Trump has had a million off ramps at this point. He's going to have to take a little bit of a beating, politically speaking, in order to divest the U.S. from Ukraine. And
Yeah.
the longer he waits to do that, the more severe consequences he'll have to face. Because if he just did it January 20th, if he just did it, one of his first acts in office is, okay, Ukraine can sit down and negotiate. We're pulling out. We're cutting this off. Yeah, that would have been bad. But once again, the longer this drags on, the closer we get to the midterms, the more problems it's going to create for Trump. And that's on top of, like I said, the million agenda items he wants to pursue at once. And whether one thinks these are positive, negative, say the tariffs, say the situation with ICE and deportations, or a number of other issues that Trump wants to tackle, he's taking things that typically an administration with it had to dedicate most of the resources for at least 2 years, if not an entire term, and he wants them all just done at once. He wants them done at the snap of a finger, whether that be peace in Ukraine, whether that be normalizing the immigration situation, or quote unquote securing the border. Not that I think that his plan is anywhere near sufficient, but I digress. Or, like I said, tariffs or sorting out the trade. And that's probably been the most dubious ones because one day it's about fairness in trade, the next day it's about a political weapon. We're going to put tariffs on to protect American industry, but we're also going to use them, say, punish India for buying Russian oil. And it just goes back to a point I think I've been harping on since Trump has returned to office. Just very inconsistent narratives. Just uh,
Yeah.
very 180. And like I said, I know we called his first term schizophrenic, and it was, but there was a
It
little bit.
pales.
Oh, it pales in comparison. There was a little bit of a turnover, like where Trump would spend a few weeks or a few months on one line before doing a 180, but now it's days, if not the same day, in which he's doing it. And a lot of people say,
Hmm.
"Oh, Trump must be senile. He must be slipping." But what I think this is this is a desperate old man who's concerned about his legacy, who has both a limited amount of time in life, being once again almost 80 years old, and in office, knowing that despite whatever claims he wants to make, whatever legal loopholes he wants to find, that he will not be able to serve again in after 2029.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you what I mean. My theory of Trump is this: he was willing to counter Russia, to fool Russia, just like any of the other Western leaders. But his red line was that you couldn't get into a full scale war with Russia. You couldn't defeat Russia. You could wear it down. Maybe something else could develop in the future, but he was never committed to what, let's say, Biden was committed to, or for that matter, let's say even Obama. I mean, you can credit Obama with having started the whole mess in the first place. But to Obama's credit, okay, Obama, along with John Kerry, when he met with Lavrov, they were discussing in the early days of Maidan a federalization of Ukraine. And that would be the path forward, right? Now, is if I remember correctly, Germany was also in favor of the federalization of Ukraine, which would give various regions, because Ukraine is a hodgepodge of different areas. Yes, it's primarily between Russians and Ukrainians,
I
but
believe
there's people who kind of identify as being both.
federalization was actually a German proposal. And to touch on your point about the
Yes.
federalization of Ukraine is I don't like the term because it's very politically charged and also isn't exactly um, applicable in this case. But Ukraine, in many ways, is a post-colonial state where, because of political circumstances, borders were pretty arbitrarily drawn uh, upon the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right, right. And so, the federalization never happened. And so you kind of have to look at, well, who wasn't in favor of federalization? Well, again, the neocons and the Brits. Of course, you can't take countries like, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, like you can't take them
They're
seriously,
the real
right?
movers and shakers. Okay, I have a lot of
Yes,
confidence in this Nevrotsky guy.
yeah, they're there to pretend like they're sovereign nations and to convince like low information Westoids like that they're oh, we have to respect these people. It's just there to create pretense for further actions. But yeah, so the federalization never happened. You can argue that maybe Obama was never that serious. I don't know how much Obama wanted this, but in any case, it's his war. He helped start it. He helped fund it. He let McCain and Victoria Nuland and all those other idiots go there and rally the people. He worked with the EU to try to fool Yevchenko into like signing this ridiculous deal where you know he could trade with the EU but not with Russia. Like that that's impossible. Even though Russia was the largest trading partner of Ukraine. Uh, so
And I will
so
say that the
anyways,
Maidan, yes, was a coup that came from Washington, but in many ways, Yanukovych was the architect of his own failure. The man, when the situation demanded he take a side, refused to.
yes, yeah, 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 and yeah. So he should have, and we should also remember in the early days, the people of the Donbass, the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, they didn't want to join Russia. Uh, Definitely not for the first year. Uh, what they wanted was just more autonomy. They didn't want the guy that they voted for to be undone through a coup. Uh, Remember that before Maidan, the majority of Ukrainians were against joining NATO. So, I would say that's something that has come and gone now. And
Well, I'll bolster your
but
point. Before Maidan, I think these statistics were like from 2010. The majority of residents of Lvov spoke Russian as their primary language of both their personal and
yeah,
professional lives. And that, like I said, even in these far western stretches of Ukraine, like Ivano-Frankovsk, Lvov, Lutsk, like these very far western oblasts, Russian was just still the language that everyone spoke before the Maidan. And that after the Maidan, you had the real big push for the Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture as something just distinct and completely alien from the Russians altogether. And that, yes, before the Maidan, in many ways, these were still uh, one nation, two states, or if you include Belarus, one nation, three states. And it has only rapidly deteriorated since then. Um, in no small part thanks to people like Obama, like Newland, like McCain, all the people you had mentioned before. But
mhm.
I think it's clear, and I don't think it needs to be reiterated, but I'm going to just for the sake of it, that the Ukrainian project, in whatever form it might be taking right now, has objectively failed. And I've made this point several months ago, maybe even over a year ago, that there are no peace terms the Russians can impose on Ukraine, even the most hardline peace terms, that would be preferable to the path of terminal decline, that wouldn't be preferable to the path of terminal decline that they're on right now.
Yeah. Um, Because I mean, it has been the project of the West to subjugate Russia for a very long time now, for nearly 2 centuries. If you just include the British. Um, so, it's not going to stop. That's why, like, in many ways, this summit was like all the other summits, all the other negotiations were in a way a waste of time, because what's going to happen once Trump is out of office? I mean, most likely a Democrat will get elected, and the Democrat Party will be rejuvenated. We'll see what happens during the midterms. Whether there will be indications in that direction. Um, and so, even by even by Putin's own admission, he says that he doesn't trust the Americans. I mean, nor should he. Russia shouldn't trust America. For that matter, Ukraine should never have trusted America. But Ukraine felt like they got hard done by history, and they would have been great if not for this country or that country, and that a future was owed to it. And if they play their cards right with the most powerful country on the planet and in history, then they could get what they wanted. And well, they're getting a lot of stuff they didn't want. And as you say, they're in decline.
Terminal decline.
So
There's no recovery from this.
terminal decline. Yeah, yeah. And it didn't have to go this way. Like, the Canadians were shipping books over that spoke highly of Bandera to the Donbass, to libraries in Donetsk City. Like, nobody wanted to read that stuff there. But you even had guys like George Soros, who was pushing that since the early '90s. He was pushing literature. So you have another story of, like, a Jew who is supporting to some degree literature that is soft on Nazi collaborators because they don't like the Russians. So if it's a contradiction, it's a contradiction. I mean, it doesn't matter to them. It doesn't worry them. Like, big deal that Israeli Jews say they hate Arabs. Well, I mean, they'll work with Arabs if those Arabs are going to fight against Assad. Like, I, you know what I don't know why people think that certain countries are so um devoted to a particular kind of ideology, and it would be such a contradiction that they could never possibly make the mistake of supporting someone that was formerly an enemy of theirs. Of course they will. I mean, all of history is replete with those sorts of examples.
Yeah, it
Anyways,
happens all the time. Like, I think Israel is probably the most clear cut example of this, where Al Qaeda controls Syria because Israel found them preferable to Assad. And I'll
yeah,
return to some of the things we were talking about in previous episodes, where Israel's coming out and fervently just denouncing the massacres of Druze. Don't mention Christians, don't mention Alawites that happened 6 months before that. These massacres that are taking place in Syria, when less than 2 weeks before that, the Israeli National Security Advisor was meeting with Jolani and was talking about the potential for peace, and Jolani was talking about joining the Abraham Accords. So yes, these things happen all the time, and when, of course, Jolani, not to
yeah,
defend him in any capacity, when he didn't budge, it became, they finally acknowledged his butchery. I'll put it that way. That is what drove them to acknowledge that, because it became politically expedient to do so. And as you said, where you have these people who are very rich Jewish individuals, I'll say, to pad out my words here, supporting guys who wave swastikas because they both have a common enemy in the Russians. And on that same point, these guys who wave the swastikas and wear the armband and Heil Bandera, whatever, are willing to take Jewish money, and they'll tell you all day about how Russia's
Yeah, there
actually.
was an article on Belitsky recently. There was an
Ugh,
article on Belitsky because he's a commander now. I think the 12th Brigade. I mean, isn't that formerly the Azov Brigade or one of the Azov? Like,
one of them, yeah.
I find it yeah, I find it confusing because there was a new one that was formed after the war and blah. Anyways,
They
it's a
launder all these
brand
names.
now.
It's kind of like Al Qaeda, ISIS. It's all they just rotate these things out.
Yeah, and so yeah, I mean that's how he got his start. They both commonly hate Russians, so they're going to work together.
Yeah,
Bygones be bygones.
I mean, just ignore the fact that all these nationalist brigades in 2014, the reason they could put these together, these militias together to go fight in the Donbass, is because they were getting money from people like Kolomoisky. It is
Yeah,
really that simple, and that these.
as was Zelensky.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's. It, I don't have it on hand, but forgive me for even mentioning Vice News on this program. But it goes back to what that guy said when Crimea was annexed. He talked about, let's just say, fascists and their certain masters. Um, yeah, I'll see if I can find the image in the meantime, because I think you guys know the one I'm
Yeah, yeah.
talking about. But yeah, it's just some old guy like in his uniform from the Soviet days, talking about the fascists and their Blanco Masonic masters. I think you guys will know which ones I'm talking about right now. But yeah, it's like people like, oh, like, haha, look at this Russian schizophrenic. Well, you know what? It turns out he was right. And that ideology actually has a lot less bearing when it comes to practical interest. And that a common enemy can unite people like nothing else. And that we're still seeing this play out right now, where all these journalists who will, of course, are of a certain ethno-religious extraction, will tell you that their fellow Jewish individuals who are part of some like lefty pro-Palestinian organization, because you love them or hate them, they're actually a little bit more principally consistent with the whole world citizen open borders thing. They'll tell you that that's enabling anti-Semitism and neo-Nazism, while writing up fluff pieces on uh, the guys who Heil Bandera. It's like I said, because it all goes back to the point where they are willing to embrace common hatred, and in a way, I suppose it is politically expedient for them, because some um, some guy in Ukraine with a swastika banner who's charging into the front lines isn't going to be their undoing. And Russia, yes, I know that it's not the based utopia nation, blah blah blah, whatever the naysayers want to say, and all the normal caveats you have to put in there. But a resurgent Russia at least presents some threat to their current power base.
Yeah, and the reason that the Russians lump all these groups together that seem at odds with one another is because they've all attacked them. So the Russians have a right to lump them.
Yeah, and when it looks like they're building a coalition, that might actually be the case, and that none of these groups are above alliances of convenience. Like I said, there are very few people who are successful that are that ideologically Puritan to the point where I'm not going to work with this guy because it violates my sacred principles. Like people like that don't get beyond, say, 1,700 subscriber shows on YouTube. I'm sorry. I had to. I had to. But now that I've taken the obligatory joke at our own expense, I suppose in terms of bizarre alliances and selling out, we could talk about Armenia and Azerbaijan and the lease of the corridor, and Aliyev and Pashinyan's wonderful meeting at the White House that took place this past week. And as we had discussed previously, Trump is trying to get that Nobel Peace Prize, where they agreed to a 99-year lease. So this will expire in 2124 to allow Azerbaijan to have a corridor that runs through Armenian territory along the border with Iran. I'll actually see if I still have the map for that right now because I think that is needed right here. So let me see here. Yes, right here. I did show this on the show last week. That red area circle that connects our Azerbaijan proper to its corridor, to its enclave that borders Turkey, and this corridor runs along the Iranian border. So there are multiple people who benefit from this. The neoconservative ruling class in the U.S. gets yet another imperial project. They get to put pressure on Russia and Iran simultaneously. The Israelis love this. They have a direct connection that they can operate on when it comes to sabotage in Iran. But the overlooked element is that Turkey greatly benefits from this because this corridor, combined with the Caspian Sea, creates a thorough way that connects all of the Turkic nations. And I'll get a larger map to demonstrate this. But that's the point of view that's being slept on right now by a lot of people because they'll talk about the interests of the neoconservatives and the interests of the Israelis, which are mostly the same. But a lot of people, especially when it comes to the question of a resurgent Turkey, are sleeping on this. And like I said, I will go ahead and get this up right now because it does create a straight line through the Turkic world, which was previously, once again, Armenia was the stumbling block in that, and also the Iranians were as well. But in a scenario in which both, I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use our show map right here that I have. I'm not gonna get the detail. I'm gonna be a little dual purpose with this. So look at where modern day Turkey would be, and you look at this. You draw a line straight to the Caspian Sea. You're in Central Asia, which modern day Central Asia, full of Turkic nations. Turkic nations that can very easily look. Well, at this point, are still on relatively good terms with the Russians. If enough pressure is exerted, could easily have nationalist and pan-nationalist sentiments stirred up. I know this was a concern in Kazakhstan for a while, where they're moving away from the Cyrillic alphabet, where they are cracking, not to the same extent as, say, somewhere like Ukraine, but they are coming down on Russian speakers, and they are really embracing this grievance culture where, oh, we were colonized by the Russians, oh, they were oppressing us, blah, 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 blah. And
Yeah, even though they were part of like the Golden Horde, yeah, you did that. I mean, you kind of had it coming, right?
And let me just put it this way. I'm not one to sit here and pearl clutch about the Western empires because, like all things in history, say the French, the British Empire in particular, there was a lot of good that happened, there was a lot of bad that happened, and you have to take these scenarios case by case in terms of, in both in terms of praise and condemnation. But compared to, say, the colonial efforts undertaken by the Western powers, the conquest of Central Asia, it was really just putting a Russian governor in charge and saying you're loyal to the Tsar now, and not much else happened. There were some Russian settlements, but in terms of direct control over these areas, it was not comparable to, say, what a lot of the Western empires did, where they set up these very complex colonial administrations that lasted for centuries in some cases. And like I said, I'm not there to,
Yeah.
finger wag and morally condemn and say, oh, they shouldn't have done that. But I'm saying, compared to who you could have
Plus,
been...
when the Soviet Union was disbanding, those same Turkic nations, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, wanted to be part of the Soviet Union.
Oh, yes.
But the decision was made. The decision was made that it would be essentially independent countries, but with an emphasis of strong ties between Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian. Non-Russians would not be included in it. And Kazakhstan was also one of those countries that wanted to be included. It did not want to leave. Right? Like, I don't know. People may hate that, but that was the consensus.
Yeah, and you're actually beating me to it. But yeah, once you get to the Soviet era, the material benefit the Central Asian nations had compared to the Slavic nations, especially Russia proper, it not even comparable. Like, so much money was put into these nations.
Yeah, as was Ukraine.
Yeah, and maybe not so much Kazakhstan, But the reason why I say Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan, the reason they don't look like Afghanistan or Pakistan is because of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's really that simple. But going back to my ultimate point is, now that you have a through line where Turkey, Azerbaijan, connected by the corridor, can now project power into the Caspian Sea and link themselves to the other Turkic nations and peddle their influence there. If you want to go even further, depending on how much headway they can actually make in Central Asia, they can spill that over into the weaker parts of China as part of that broader Turkic project.
Yeah.
And I believe I mentioned this last episode, or maybe the episode before that, on the solo episodes I did. But I do think what we're looking at right now when it comes to the next major conflict, because the West is no state to fight a conventional conflict, is that the West is going to throw their weight behind the Turkic nations in order to put pressure on both Russia and China.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Uh, it makes sense where the geography is, right? Um, yeah, the West will not give up on that, and also like I despise the stupid Westoids who like I'll give you an example of this kind of mindset which is prevalent in the West, and not just with right wingers. So I'm watching two left of center university age guys, this is years ago, talking about Baudrillard, and Baudrillard making certain claims about Europe and America, how they're vastly different, and so on and so on, and how there's a certain rot that has taken that is in place in America, et cetera, et cetera. But now, because of America's dominance, it's happening in Europe. And these guys were gleeful and cheering. There's no, there is no generosity with them. None. It doesn't exist. Um, I would say right wingers in Russia are far more generous. Eastern European right wingers, far more generous when they're not talking about, let's say, Russia. Yeah, if they're a country that has a grievance with Russia, of course, there's some that don't.
When they're not talking about each other, I think gets the point you're trying to say.
Right, but I'm saying with a lot of Westoids, like when they say Russia's not really based, like that's supposed to blow your mind, when in fact you can't even approach their lack of basedness. Okay, uh, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids don't learn about homosex in their public schools, so please get real. uh Gay men can't adopt children, like get the fuck out of here.
Hey, but
Okay.
they have
Eh,
Central Asians on work permits. Okay, that's
yeah, whatever. And so like it's not even comparable, but let's say the only reason they glee in that, or pretend that they care, like like a concerned troll, is they want this country infected. They want it to have what they have, because they can't bear the idea that in some areas this country is better than they are. They cannot bear it. They would rather have the whole thing, all Europeans, go into become like a civilization of ashes, if it meant that they would have to be second or third place. There's just no generosity with these people. And as I was saying at the beginning of the show, it's usually these guys that have the most extravagant conspiracy theories about why things are happening the way they are. Absolutely stupid, resentful people. Uh, and their logic is very easy to tear apart. Yeah, so these guys, I mean, it kind of like it's always been there, like these British and American mercs that joined the war because they really believe, in Ukraine, because they really believe in it. Like, I'm in the retarded ramblings chat, and I said these guys are so arrogant and stupid. This one guy like literally went to Ukraine, got killed within months, left behind, his wife and two daughters, 1 4, 1 6. And I said, these guys are so stupid and egotistical that they don't even need Jews to propagandize them anymore. They don't need them. It's just built in. They don't need them. regrettably, I would say don't even blame the Jews for this, because it seems to be like part of their DNA. It's the most peculiar thing.
Well, I will say, and I've said many times, but in terms of right wing circles, the problem of Perfidious Albion is slept on immensely. People,
Yeah, like we'll wait till Geo comes in. I'll give you the whole backstory to the battle for Gallipoli, and then
oh,
the last Russo-Turkish war that took place in the 19th century. You know, when
yeah,
the Russians were 7 kilometers from the center of Istanbul. So the
uh,
Queen wrote the admiral and the general in charge that if you allow the Russians to take it, she called them barbarians. Like, she called Russians barbarians, but not those Turks. And she said, if you allow them to take Istanbul, if you allow those barbarians to take Istanbul, I will abdicate the throne. Right? That's what you have in them, right? That no generosity. I would rather I would rather empower like the global Turkic world than have these guys. Even though my country is only 57% white, I would rather have that. That's how pathetic they are.
yeah.
I've
That's what it always comes back to. And you know what? I will say, in defense of the Western European continental nations, there is. I'm not saying much more, but there is a noticeable amount more of just say charitability or generosity towards them. Like you even look
yeah,
at
yeah,
look at the French draw up for post World War One plans. Very generous to the Russians, and they didn't give them Constantinople, but they didn't let the Turks keep it either. They had the Turkish nation fractured, and so not it's not even to get into say the relationship between Bismarck's Germany and Imperial Russia, which was I guess you could say fruitful in some ways, and that Bismarck understood the necessity of some sort of peace with Russia if continental Europe were to be successful. And like I said, I'm not saying that they're completely blameless in all of this, but compared to the Anglosphere world, the
yeah,
Anglosphere world, like
absolutely.
they would let all of Europe burn, Russia, Western Europe combined, if it meant being king of those ashes.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of people will not want to hear that, but that's the truth. That's the truth.
And
Like,
I think both world wars. And you know what's interesting is I think a lot of people will come close to that, but because they do have some, let's just say, instinctual negative reaction towards the idea of Russia, or especially the Soviet Union, a little more understandable in the case of the latter. I'll say not entirely, but a little more understandable. That you know they'll come close to that when they talk about say the conflicts between the Anglosphere and Germany, but then they won't look at the whole picture.
yeah, absolutely. You know, I know this is off to this to the as an aside, but you know when we were talking earlier about the summit and Putin's words and so on and so forth, and the sites that he visited, etc., in Russia that honored both American and Russian pilots during World War II. You know, when he went to China, he also there is in northern China there is an enclave of white Russians. These are not Belarusian, but these are white Russians who fought alongside the Tsar for the Tsar's forces against the Bolsheviks. China has never like um, cracked down on these people. They're allowed to practice their religion, et cetera, et cetera. And he went and visited them. So I think that was he seems to do this. But anyways, I forgot to mention that. I
Yeah,
mean, it just
that is
came
interesting.
to me now.
The Russian exiles in Harbin that he did pay them a visit, and he also throughout Putin's term, if we're talking about his just idea of like you know broader Russian nation, broader Russian history. There's been several cases where he has awarded the descendants of white emigres Russian citizenship. I think there was a woman. I think she was probably in her 70s at that point, but she was either the daughter or the granddaughter of one of the exiled czarist men, and I think it was like 2008. He gave her a Russian passport.
Yeah.
Very famously has the photo ops with Solzhenitsyn. I think that was also around
Oh yeah, yeah,
the early 2000s as well. But yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because there's still a few things we have to talk about with Europe and the Middle East that I'll get into in the round out the show. But what is interesting, a lot of people like, and of course the news coverage I was listening to some of the mainstream media coverage is the KGB Colonel Putin wants to reestablish the Soviet Union. You know, the slop that they always try to feed you whenever they bring up Putin. Uh,
Yeah.
if nothing else, and you can say it's cynical, you can say it's political, if nothing else, at least an outward appearance for a great deal of respect for both Russian history before 1917 and after 1917. If nothing else about Putin, you can give him credit for that.
Yeah.
But I suppose with all of that out of the way, we can talk about. Yeah, I suppose we did begin with that with some talk about the Anglosphere. I want to talk about the terminal decline of Europe and just their apoplectic reaction to the recent events, not only surrounding Ukraine, but just global politics in general.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline is the seminal event. Like Trump may have sanctioned it, but it was going to go through. Eventually, I think Merkel would have allowed it to go through, and that's, I think, what caused Biden to blow it up, to make sure that it would never happen.
Oh yeah.
Because the turbines, as you know, they were being shipped to Canada because Canada had some sort of an agreement to clean them out and whatnot. And I that doesn't sound like this is a pipeline that is never going to be used, and that's why he had it blown up. Um, and what that's done is that, I believe, is a seminal event that pushed the Europeans now into prolonging the war, because I think, as far as they see it, is they're going, of these three castles, they're going to be the castle who's going to lose the most economically. And they have to keep pushing for the war. They have to keep getting some kind of aid from the US after this, because, well, I mean, in particular with Germany, their economy is suffering. And where else are they going to go? In many respects, with the rest of the world, they've become pariahs. Um, something that, a label that's been attached to Russia for a significant number of years, but particularly since the beginning of the SMO. So I think in many ways, it's kind of like the Muslims invading Andalusia, invading Spain, um, where the boats were burned, and it was kind of like, you don't have an option to come back, and you have to conquer. And that's kind of where Europe is at right now, except they're not willing to conquer.
And yeah, I think that's spot on because Nord Stream, among other energy and economic projects, presented a bridge to Russia, where some sort of
Yeah,
diplomatic and economic relationship could exist. But once that was destroyed, orders came in from Washington that either you help us defeat Russia and you get to enjoy some spoils of war, or you enter into terminal decline and are committed to the dustbin of history. And
yeah,
I hate to say it, but it worked out exactly as intended. You have a total of two EU nations that have anything resembling resistance to that, and that's Hungary and Slovakia. With all due respect to both those nations, they are not the movers and shakers of the continent. They are not going to be the ones who are able
yeah,
to overthrow the system. I mean, already it looks like, and one of the pieces of European news I wanted to cover is that Orban is in for a very difficult battle next year in 2026 when it comes to his reelection, where they are mobilizing everything against him. And I know that they done this previously, that they've tried to get rid of him, that Peter Magyar has been their darling in Budapest for a number of years now. But it looks like with the economic decline in Europe, with the just pressure in terms of both political and financial they are exerting on Hungary right now, it might be enough to actually form cracks in the coalition. And that, in many ways, is thanks to the idea, or thanks to some of the actually right wing elements in Hungary who are willing to stab Fidesz and stab Orban in the back in order to prove a point. This very purity spiraling politics where we will form a coalition with the most deranged pro EU liberals if it means getting one over on Orban because he was insufficient on one issue or he's too conciliatory towards the
Yeah.
Russians or whatever. And like I said, I don't think that he is doomed in 2026. I don't think that he is done for necessarily, but there's a real possibility he could be removed. And we've seen also, even though they're not part of the European Union, the ongoing protests in Serbia, the crackdown on Republika Srpska with the prosecution of Dodik, and also some attempts at color revolution in Slovakia. And I mean, that's because the major nations of Europe, France, Germany, they are all under heel. And even with that, look at the ongoing prosecutions against AFD officials, or the ongoing prosecution against Le Pen and the National Rally. And that's also on top of, I know we touched on the question of ID verification, particularly coming out of the UK, spilling over into private companies. One thing the European Union wants to do right now is it's slated for a vote, I believe on October 14th, sometime in October, where they effectively want to kill chat encryption and things like WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, where everything you say is subjected to EU surveillance. And it's the final crackdown on whatever insurgent force exists in Europe. Because while many of these nationalist movements, while many of these populist movements are wholly insufficient, and while many of them, if they ever did achieve power, would turn out like Maloney in Italy, where they completely assimilate into the system with the quote-unquote base aesthetics, the idea that they might even come close to some degree of reform or some degree of moderation against the just disastrous policies of Brussels is enough to warrant a complete surveillance state. Like I said, I'm long departed from my libertarian priors, but one thing that really echoes back to them is the question of mass surveillance. That every little thing you do and say will be monitored by not only the state, but the superstate, the dozens of intelligence agencies across Europe, which, of course, many of them are plugged into the Five Eyes, who are going to link that back to the U.S. and the rest of the Anglosphere, where it becomes a complete surveillance network. And I would recommend to... Well, actually, no, I don't recommend anything. You people take action of your own volition. But I will say there are nations in Europe, primarily Switzerland, that still do have very good privacy laws. And I'm not saying those are perfect. I'm not saying those are airtight. But if you have the opportunity, it may be wise to divest from the Five Eyes and the 14 Eyes nations as much as you can when it comes to anything having to do with telecommunications. And I'm just putting that out there because I think that might be a wise move. I don't think it's going to be quite to the point where maybe some of the worst case scenarios in the UK where you get a knock on the door for even existing on the internet there. But if you're somebody with any degree of, let's just say, significant political activity or any degree of might be a quote-unquote threat to the regime or an active member of any of these parties, you probably are going to face a severe degree of legal scrutiny at this point. They might not, under their laws, have enough evidence to throw you in jail or fine you or anything, but they can always keep that pressure on you. They can always drag you through the court. They can always make you show up to hearings that don't go anywhere. And that they have the ability, and that they're expanding the ability to conduct complete lawfare against really anyone with any sense on the continent, really. Anyone who is opposed to this this death spiral, as it were. And they will continue to do that. One would hope they will reach a breaking point. And it does look like that they have managed to, speaking of breaking points, successfully alleviate uh, the idea of a breaking point when it comes to remilitarization of Europe, because infrastructure spending counts as defense spending. So, as we have in Italy, they can build a new bridge and say that's part of their NATO defense spending. But if we were to say take the plans of someone like Merz in Germany for the remilitarization of Europe, the cost that would have to just the basic social safety nets for a threat that I think most people understand fundamentally does not exist. I think that's probably the only thing that could overturn order in Europe. But as we've seen, they've been able to take a lot of abuse, and that they will continue to take it. The migrant situation hasn't been alleviated. There's been an illusion that the migrant situation has been alleviated, but in many ways, I don't even think they have to pretend to put these pretend nationalist parties up anymore, because I think anyone with any degree of influence in Europe is so beaten down, so ground into the Atlanticist system that they're going to take whatever marching orders they can get. And that, barring a massive course correction soon, I fear nothing but the worst for Europe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they, like you say, they have two options. Uh, I mean, they really only have one, and that's perpetuate a war with Russia. Who's next after Ukraine, right? Uh, because I was going to say the other option is um, become relevant again. But how do you become relevant when it's when something like really cheap energy for manufacturing is taken away? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, you could say in this struggle, this global struggle, America understands that there cannot be a partnership, even a partnership as weak as that of Russia and Europe, with a particular emphasis between Russia and Germany, um, without that somehow, endangering America, right? So Europe had to be weakened for this, and we said that even before the war started. You predicted in 2021 that they would blow up the Nord Stream, and that's why, right? That's why. It's like that interview from 2024, the podcast that we reviewed by Kotkin, who said, we don't have any mass armies. Ukraine is our last mass army that we need to keep American interests rolling along, right? Well, I mean, after this, it's going to be Europe, and that's why you have a lot of elites saying we're going to be at war with Russia in between 2 to 5 years from now. I mean, part of that is just to scare people to support Ukraine,
Yeah,
because
that's it.
Russia's going to collapse, but also it's going to conquer Europe at the same time.
Amazing what they can
Um,
do in their orcish ways, where they're always on the brink of collapse and world domination at the same time. I,
Yeah,
I,
but really it's just about them, like, being good vassals of the US, and, like, if you want a cut, you're going to have to conquer Russia. Russia has to be balkanized in order for you in that Eurasian region of the sort of the western peninsula of Eurasia to be successful. But you can't be too successful, right? You can't be so successful, right? It would be a Russia that would ultimately be controlled by America, right? But you won't be allowed to be more successful than America, right? And so that's the state that Europe is in at the moment.
and there's no seeming exit route, barring in my opinion, complete dissolution of the European Union, which wouldn't solve nearly enough of the problems that would need to be
No.
solved. But it would break that main axis of control in Europe via Brussels. At the very least, it would need to be you wake up tomorrow, both the EU and NATO no longer exist. And like I said, that wouldn't come close to solving the problem, but that would be the bare minimum you would need to do to even create a feasible off ramp. And even that's pretty infeasible right now.
And that's why they're so afraid of a defeat in Ukraine, because it would completely delegitimize them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, arguably it already has, but it would put that final nail in the coffin where these are impotent, these are defunct organizations. And thinking back about Brexit, because I was thinking about this when I was looking at some of the stuff that was happening with Hungary right now with Brussels' newest crackdown, that Brexit is something they obviously did not want to happen. They wanted to keep the UK in the European Union for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
But I think if there were other nations that tried to leave the European Union, even through a referendum like the UK did, they would have been met with much harsher scrutiny. Now, the UK didn't get off easy, don't get me wrong, because the ultimate Brexit deal was you're going to withdraw from the Union while maintaining all the obligations but none of the benefits of membership. But let's just say a different scenario where Hungary or even Poland, for whatever reason, would have wanted to have their own referendum to leave the European Union. Uh, I think there would have been sanctions, honestly. If these countries were to
Hmm.
leave, they would have been completely cut off from the European network. They would have been left to uh, really live in economic isolation that they would not have gotten. I don't want to call it the UK got a sweetheart deal, but they would not have gotten a quote unquote cooperative relationship with the European Union despite being outside of it. And that really, I think the UK is the only nation that could have left the European Union and not have been at least attempted to be destroyed. Not that the UK isn't being destroyed right now, but I think you guys get my point where the forces of
Yeah, yeah.
Brussels would have come down. They would have rained hell down upon any nation. I think that wasn't the UK or maybe a few of the other outliers in Europe. But like I said, if it would have been Hungary, if it would have been Slovakia, Poland, any of the eastward expansion countries, or maybe even like in Italy at that point, or Spain on the southern fringes of Europe, I don't think they would have been nearly as conciliatory. And like I said, I want to reiterate that they weren't very conciliatory towards the British at all. If that gives you an idea of what kind of treatment probably would have befallen them.
Yeah, I I guess one day we should probably do a deep dive on Brexit. No, I mean in the older shows from years back,
Yeah, but
we
with a
did
fresh
spend a lot of
perspective,
time,
yeah.
yeah, with a fresh perspective, because now I think in light of the war in Ukraine, like how much anticipation was there of a war in Ukraine intensifying to the level that it is now, World War II level. How much of an anticipation of that happening influenced Brexit? I mean, it was never formally stated, but I have often wondered about that. Um, Now, because it hasn't really worked out for them, doesn't mean they didn't speculate that it would work out for them. But I wonder about that. I wonder if they thought being out of the EU would have given them more resilience. But again, there's also the question of the banks. There's the question of currency independence. Unlike Croatia adopting the euro. y- You know, um, so I wonder about that. About how great a role that was.
I I think you might be onto something. Like, yeah, I do think you're right. That does warrant further discussion. We should do a separate program at some point with that. But I suppose there's not much more we can say about Europe without retreading old ground, and we can finish out the show by talking about Israel, everyone's favorite country, because
Mm.
I already discussed a bit the tariffs. It seems like those didn't materialize in really anything beyond Trump having a minor feud with India that probably isn't going to last. It's probably going to be just a series of back and forth as one expected. But I mean, India's not budging. And I say this out of no love for India. I'm sure you've all heard my opinions before. But in response to the whole tariff problem, you've had both talks with Russia and a restoration of direct flights from India to China as well. Countries that historically have not gotten along, but under a new paradigm have at least formed some sort of alliance of convenience that isn't likely to be shaken anytime soon, especially if Washington decides to put more pressure on India as it stands. But getting into Israel, because I know we didn't touch on it too much last week. A lot of it was just getting back up to speed after your absence, which, once again, completely fine with that. But the situation in Gaza only manages
Yeah.
to get worse. And I don't think either of us are particularly what one would call bleeding hearts about really any issue. But I don't know how much longer this can continue, how many more excuses can be made for Israel while this continues to go on. And not only the situation in Gaza, which I think is the most glaring problem for obvious reasons, but just how much more gradually unhinged this state continues to act. That there's something new every day, whether in terms of a domestic policy or foreign policy issue, where they just continue to slide further and further into the territory of, I'd say, and I don't use this word lightly, complete irrationality, where anything and everything that could possibly challenge them must be subdued with every tool available to them. Whether that's some sort of opposition in Western nations, whether that is any of the surrounding countries, whether that is countries not supporting them enough. And you have to wonder, how much longer can this go on? Can Israel continue to do this indefinitely? Do they have the manpower, support, and resources to continue on their current course indefinitely? Is the curse of the 8th decade real? Is Israel going to make it to 80 years old? And perhaps I'm biased, and I try not to let that paint that, but the trajectory which Israel goes on, I'm not saying it's going to be the dissolution of the Israeli state, but it's not going to be what it once was. That they are not going to have this kind of power to command the kind of influence that they once did. And while they still do have deeply entrenched lobbies, not only in the United States, but across the world, at a certain point they're going to run into a problem of diminishing returns, where even if you have half the Congress visit Israel, which they did this week, at a certain point they're only going to be able to do so much for them, just practically speaking, that just because of the laws of reality, there's going to be a certain level of support they are simply not capable of providing, especially if we do get a more confrontational posture with China in the Asia Pacific, or just in the Asia Pacific in general, or depending on how much of an aggressive policy they want to continue to pursue towards Russia. At a certain point, Israeli interests, for the sake of the American empire, which I'm far from a supporter, mind you, at a certain point, they're going to get to a fork in the road where it's the interests of the Israeli project in particular, or the American empire as a whole. And
That's very well said.
I honestly don't know which one they're going to choose. Will they destroy the empire to preserve Israel? Which in many ways is a lose-lose, because Israel will not preserve.
It's looking that way.
I agree, it is looking that way, but it is supremely ironic, because Israel cannot be served in the absence of the empire, yet they're willing to destroy the empire to serve the interests of Israel. Rather than taking the back seat, rather than saying, look, kick the can down the road 5 more years with Hamas before you do it again. We need time to recover. We need time to stabilize the situation. But the hardline Zionists on both sides of the Atlantic, or just across the world, really, are so deathly afraid of making any sort of agreement or concession that they will destroy the empire for the sake of the Zionist project, which, I will reiterate once again, is wholly dependent on the empire. And one has to wonder at some point, because I did mention the curse of the 8th decade. At some point, is it just divine intervention that this kind of stuff's supposed to happen? Like I said, I don't like to make those claims definitively, because I'm in no way in a position to make those claims. But it does make one wonder at a certain point. It's like, this goes against all human logic and rationality. Are these entities under some sort of condemnation to the point where they take these decisions?
I mean, one theory is that the Jews know that America might be in decline, and so they need to make Israel as powerful as ever, expand the borders of Israel, have strong power of projection in the region, have its own vassal states, its own gravity, which it already does, um, with of course help from the U.S. But I guess they want to prepare for a time where there won't be training wheels, as it were, and they'll be able to do that on their own, which will create an Israeli state even more psychotic and insane than the one that they already have. I just can't see it happening, though. Like, they already are not independent enough. They already cannot. Like, let's say they take half of Jordan. Let's say they expand into Syria. Let's say they take Lebanon. Is that enough? Do they have a population big enough? Are they going to lure people back? Are they going to lure Jews from around the world to make Israel's quote unquote great again? Like, where it doesn't need uh external help? Like, I mean, Israel receives billions and billions of dollars just from Germany per year. Like, so it's invested in that the West survives. Of course, they want to shape the West. That's good for them. But there's no country or list of countries that are willing to fund them the way the West is.
And that's why you had the pivot towards the very safe nationalism of people like Yoram Hazony. I think is probably the most infamous example of this, where you can have all this
Yes.
stuff so long as you pledge your undying support to Israel. Because it turns out, without you
Yeah.
guys, even though we have spent decades, if not centuries, scoffing at you and actively working against you, hey guys, it turns out we need your help, and we'll let you be a little based if it means we get to expand into Jordan and
Yeah.
Lebanon. But you do also have to wonder the situation in Israel, demographically speaking. And I acknowledge there's certain biological realities that we just can't get around. But I try not to be too much of a biological determinist when it comes to my analysis of these other situations, because I don't think it tells the full story. But when you do look at the demographics of Israel, it's increasingly more Mizrahi. It's increasingly more
Mm-hmm.
Middle Eastern in the true sense. And
Yeah, Sephardic and
yeah, and that's not to say that like the Ashkeys are like look, as much as I joke, I don't actually buy the Ashkey Turkic. I mean, if you look at their genetic story, they're mutts. Okay, just all the different places that they've moved around to, they've picked up a little
totally.
DNA here and there. But once again, they are similar enough to Europeans where they build a somewhat European-looking side. I don't want to push that envelope too far. But as Israel becomes increasingly more Sephardic and increasingly more Mizrahi in particular, are they going to be able to maintain this full spectrum dominance over their neighbors that they had? Or are they going to start resembling more of their Arab country? Because you look at these Mizrahis, they're made up of much of the same stock of a lot of their neighbors. And it is these middling Arab nations. The only difference is they're going to be wearing yarmulkes instead of whatever local dress that they might have in these other countries, and that's not going to be sustainable. But as they become more of a dominant class, they might act more and more unhinged themselves. That might get into the idea of, say, Israel taking more and more drastic actions. And are we going to be in a scenario where it is what Israel at that point will have an average IQ? And like I said, I don't want to be too much of like IQ determines
Mm-hmm,
everything.
mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
average IQ is what makes or breaks nations, because it's important, but it is not the sole factor that is going to determine whether or not a nation succeeds or fails. But when you do have, let's say, a Mizrahi ruling class with the launch codes, are they going to be as restrained, which isn't very restrained in the first place, as, say, their Ashkenazi counterparts?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've thought about the same thing.
And look, I don't
And
want to.
speaking of
I don't want to excuse Israel throughout its. Oh no, you sent me something. Oh no, oh no. You know, you know what you know what I'm gonna call this file when I save it to put it on screen. I'm calling it Pale of
Mm.
Settlement. Yeah. Let me just get this up here. Uh, I I forgot we had talked about this. This was an interesting conversation. Mister Milikovsky um, is right there. You have, like I said, the face of the Pale of Settlement. It turns out he is a mix between both Ashkenazi Jew and Tatar, uh, and I would say these were probably the founding fathers of a country like Israel, and not that I think that Israel was ever particularly a moral state. Uh, the IDF has become more and more unhinged over time, and I do think that does have to do with the demographic shift there, where not that these guys didn't. I mean, look at who formed the Haganah and the Stern Gang and stuff like that. They have a lot of blood on their hands as well. But when it comes to say like the
Hmm.
case where they were protesting over IDF soldiers being arrested for sodomizing prisoners, just to put it bluntly, it, those guys were from the Mizrahi stock of the population, and that I do think
Yeah,
as
yeah.
demographics tend to shift in Israel, there that's going to continue to create more problems. However, I do think there's an opportunity here because right now the narrative they pushed for a while, but they've especially pushed since October 7th. Is they only hate Israelis because they think they're white settler colonialists and blah 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 blah. So therefore, you as a right winger should at least be neutral towards Israel. But I do have to wonder, as Israel undergoes its own quote unquote browning, as it were, is that narrative going to stick? Are you still going to have these people
Hmm.
who are going to be able to run defense of Israel as a semi-European society, or as it starts to visibly look more like, say, a Middle Eastern society? Are they going to be able to maintain the same support of Western right wingers? Which is why I think, like, although that push has always been there, why they are going to overdrive with pushing the defending of Israel, even among, say, the nationalist right in Western countries.
Yeah, I mean, because people talk about about the declining support for Israel amongst young people in America, and I have no doubt that that includes Republicans and
Oh,
people who identify as
statistically, it
being.
does.
Yeah, I know that it is cratering. I get it, and I think it's true. But a lot of it is, if you're looking at a demographic of, let's say, 25 and under, that's because more than 50% of those people are not white. And I think that plays a pretty big role. And I don't know, are they playing 4D chess with getting a lot of Mizrahi Jews and Sephardic Jews, like
You know,
because I think
it could be.
because because they would essentially, what would happen is they would lose interest, right? Like a lot of non-whites don't support Israel, but a lot of it is just because it's alien to them, especially if they're um especially if they're from Central or South America, right? um of course, the blacks in America have a long history with the Jews.
Which, of
Not
course,
always
for the
good,
sake of
but
our
often the Jews
platform,
supporting them and their causes.
for the
But
sake of our platform, is wonderful and diverse, and we love it nothing more than that. But but to touch on your point, I think that's also part of the reason why, both in terms of the migrant communities in America and in terms of even in Central and South America, why there is such a push for, say, like Protestant missionaries to really, I guess, work their magic there.
yeah,
But as you
yeah,
as you were
what a
saying,
what a great thing. They Protestantism is really likes Jews. So, anyways, um, yeah. So I don't know how much of a role that plays, but it's not there yet. Israel is not there where um, it's just two different brown people killing each other. So
Actually,
I don't know what to say.
you look at some of these guys out of Palestine, Lebanon. Some of them are a bit more fair skinned these days.
There are literally Palestinians that are more fair looking than some of the Israeli Jews.
I think it was, which will segue somewhat into my next point. During the pager attacks in Lebanon, uh, like some sort of official Hezbollah media outlet posted a picture of one of their commanders, and it was a guy with he wasn't blonde, but he had light brown hair and blue eyes. Uh,
Yeah.
Still had a facial structure that you could say like find some places in the Mediterranean, like if you were to go to some places like maybe in Italy or Greece or even parts of Spain, maybe that. But like I said, enough where they would probably be at first glance mistaken for a Southern European.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, but with that, there is a push now in Lebanon. I suppose I'll close the show with this because this is only going to lead to more violence and more chaos in the region. To disarm Hezbollah. And the Lebanese central government is actually going for that undertaking in order to disarm Hezbollah. And yeah, you can say a lot of things, even if you don't like them, which I'm not going to say like I'm a supporter for number one. I'm not. Number two, obvious legal and social reasons, I don't want to say that. But in terms of stability of the region, that's just asking for another Lebanese civil war. Because you look at it right now, even with the beating they've taken from their conflict with Israel and from the pager attacks, Hezbollah is still the most powerful military organization in Lebanon. Number one. Number two, uh, the Central Army is not going to be able to enforce that. And I don't think that even like
Hmm.
from a perspective of will to enforce that, because even among a lot of the non-Shia populations, they've uh, in many, I don't want to say made their peace, but in many ways they've accepted Hezbollah as part of Lebanese society, and the fact that they're effectively going to run a state in the state because that's just the way Lebanese politics is going to work. And that whoever is leaning on the Lebanese central government to pursue this disarmament is going it's going to result in more violence, and they want it to result in more violence. They want Lebanon to look like Syria again. They want it to be completely destabilized, because if you're not like Jordan, where you're going to roll over to every Israeli demand, your country is going to be destabilized. It is going to be fractured. It is going to look like Syria or Libya or Lebanon, and which is probably going to get worse in the coming months and years. And it does go back to this unhinged Israeli policy where everything, and much like a lot of people in the Anglosphere, I do think you get this out of Israel. They would rather be king of the ashes than second place to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's a bit more overt on their part. They're a bit. They do away with the optics a little compared to a lot of people in the Anglosphere. I'll just put it that way. And I think this is all interesting, and we did touch on this last week. But the real last point I'll end it with is this is all in light of the fact that several Western countries, I suppose you could say, are quote unquote threatening to recognize a Palestinian state, which, in my opinion, is only going to make Israeli behavior more erratic. It's only going to make them say support the Lebanese central government in disarming Hezbollah, or support tensions in Lebanon, or support tensions in Syria, whatever else, in order to further their goals, so they can assert more power, so they have more excuse to assert more power. And so they also are able to double down on the war in the Gaza Strip, because of the idea that these countries might even give some passive recognition to a Palestinian state, even though when you look at it, the demands these countries have, not Hezbollah, I'm sorry, Hamas has to disarm, and they have to sit down at the negotiating table. Pretty much, they want to turn Gaza into the West Bank when it comes to a rump state that is just open up for Israeli conquest. And even with that, even in something that is ultimately in a roundabout way in their interest, the Israelis are so determined to have full spectrum dominance that they are not going to make any concessions at all. And I do think there's other political aspects for the threatening, quote unquote, of the recognition of the Palestinian state, especially when it comes to their appeals to the Muslim world. But what
Hmm.
was a complicated conflict in and of itself has become just completely unsolvable. Not that I think there was ever a clear solution in the first place, but as it stands now, as Israel continues to exist, especially in its current form, we're only going to get more and more of this, and that as countries continue to give into its every whim, we're only going to get more and more of this. Until I'm not even saying that for the sake of the scenario, they have to say we're done. We're going to unrecognize Israel. We're going to pull recognition, but this is going to go on until somebody with some sort of influence tells Israel no. Now, the closest we've come to that is their skirmishes with the Iranians, the so-called 12-day war. But I'm talking somebody on the stage, whether that is by some miracle an American president does that, whether it is, say, Russia and China realizing that this has just gone on too far, that this is going to spill over and probably eventually even affect us if this doesn't happen. But at some point, it's going to take a major power, a country with actual influence in the world, to tell Israel no, or else this is just going to continue to spiral either until Israel destroys us all or Israel gets destroyed itself.
Yeah. I mean, as long as it's in America, there's going to be an Israel. I don't know if that's going to change. I mean, it was this enormous gambit, with the discovery of oil, where I think they thought like if they could. I mean, we discussed even Cromwell wanted to send them to the Holy Land, uh, but wanted to convert them to Anglicanism. Of course, have a foothold there, right? Um, this was, of course, after the Crusades, after the last holdouts on the continent. There were, of course, some islands that were still ostensibly part of the Crusades' legacy. But well, with the discovery of oil, I think they felt like, I mean, look, the Jews wanted for one reason, the Anglos wanted it for another. They even like influenced a form of Christianity that would like ostensibly worship them over our Lord Jesus Christ, and set up like dual covenant theology, all kinds of stupid heretical things. And it's much more embedded in American society than just like the money, politicians being paid off by these people. Like, and these people are absolute scum when you look at what is happening in Gaza. Like, you just watch those videos where they shoot people that are like trying to get food. It's just the most disgusting people I have ever seen in my life. Protesters blocking aid reaching the Gazans. Just the absolute. I'm repeating myself, but the scum, the absolute scum of humanity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've made the comparison before, but these are no different than the Salafist jihadists who took over Syria. They are cut from the same
Yeah.
cloth. One
Yes, absolutely.
one
I
wears a
had one
turban, one wears
friend.
a yarmulke. That's the only difference.
I had one friend who's kind of semi. I don't know. No, loyal is too strong a word, but empathetic towards them. And I remember him telling me, "Oh, come on, man. Jews are basically Europeans. They're just a different kind of European." And I remember talking with him after this, and I said, "They're not European. This is not how Europeans behave. They're not us." And as you pointed out with Jelani, they're more like them. That's who they are.
And I had said it in reference to Ukraine. I'll say it in reference to here. If this happened in Bosnia in the '90s, I mean, we destroyed Yugoslavia over that. We,
Yes, absolutely.
but when this happens, this is another 30 billion. That's
Exception to the rule. Exception to the rule.
they're really the most moral army in the world because they're the
Oh
arbiters of
yeah.
morality, so they can never be wrong. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Everything they say is right. Everything you say is wrong, and I can keep beating this horse to death, but there's really no point in that. So I figured, we're just over the 2 hour mark. It's around midnight local time as of time of
Yeah.
recording. So I suppose we'll wrap it up here. If you had any final comments on anything we discussed.
Uh, no, no, I'm good. I'm good. Maybe hang on, I just want to send you a photo because I wanted to send you this. We're not going to talk about it, but this is just the map giving an idea. That this map I forgot to use. It really demonstrates like the front line at Pokrovsk and what's happening there. The green represents the recent gains in the last few weeks, and you can see it's quite a bit and what's developing. Anyhow,
Yeah, let me just get that up right here.
too late. This show is all over the place, and I'm the biggest culprit for making it that way.
Oh no, it's. I mean, I think that people know what to expect at this point. But yeah, this is what we're looking at
I
right
mean,
now.
I'm also glad people stopped talking about a certain island.
You see, we've stopped talking about it so much. I don't even know what you're referencing. Yeah, that's who doesn't enjoy a good vacation. That's and you learn so much about the people you go on that you can use against them later. It's really amazing.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm sure that has no connection to the topic we just discussed.
no, no. And
Oh no!
I'm honestly not implying. I'm not. I'm honestly not implying that he went and like has sex with underage girls. I am. I do think he's a little different than them, but I think he completely tolerated it. He is scummy in a different way, and especially when he was younger. But
I mean,
I could be wrong.
all I'll say
That's my feelings on it.
all I'll say about the temple that doesn't exist. I'm willing to give some people the benefit of the doubt that they were brought there to simply implicate them because them even being there is enough of a condemnation in and of itself, even if they didn't participate in
Yeah,
anything beyond that, and that it's perfect blackmail
absolutely.
material, and that a lot of them probably looked the other way, and a lot of them, especially when you get into these young first-term congressmen, were probably stupid enough not to realize what was going on, and now they're blackmailed for
Yeah,
life.
that's right.
Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, that's an interesting image. That's all I'll say. um, the island that doesn't even exist. That's my position.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get the files that don't exist any day now. But thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of the
Yeah.
War Report. We'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.